The telegram said her groom was waiting. It was a lie. When 22-year-old Evelyn Harper stepped off that dusty train in Colorado Territory, clutching nothing but a worn suitcase and a stranger's promise, she had no idea the man who'd sent for her was already 2 days in the ground. No husband, no home, no hope. Just a frontier town that didn't want her and 3,000 miles between her and the life she'd left behind. But sometimes the worst moment of your life is just the beginning of something extraordinary. If you want to see how this impossible situation transforms into an unforgettable love story, stay with me until the very end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The wind tasted like iron and dust. Evelyn Harper had read about the West in dime novels back in Boston, tales of golden opportunity and limitless horizons, of men who carved empires from wild land and women who stood beside them, brave and unbreakable. The reality that greeted her as she stepped onto the warped wooden planks of Salvation Creek's train platform was something else entirely. The air was thinner here, sharper. It scraped against her throat with each breath, carrying the scent of livestock and unwashed bodies and something else she couldn't name, something ancient and indifferent. The sun hung like a brass coin in a sky so vast it made her dizzy. Back home, buildings had blocked the sky into manageable pieces. Here, there was nothing between her and that crushing blue expanse except her own insignificance. "Miss Harper?" She turned to find a man in a station master's cap approaching. His weathered face creased with something that might have been sympathy or might have been discomfort. Either way, it made her stomach drop. "Yes, I'm Evelyn Harper. I'm looking for Mr. Samuel Morrison. He was supposed to—" "I know who you are, miss." The station master removed his cap, crushing it between calloused hands. "That's why I came out. There's some unfortunate news." The suitcase slipped from Evelyn's fingers, hitting the platform with a hollow thud that seemed to echo across the empty street beyond. She didn't bend to pick it up. Her hands had gone numb. "What kind of news?" "Mr. Morrison passed 2 nights ago. Shootout at the Silver Spur. Some drifter accused him of cheating at cards. It was over before anybody could stop it. I'm real sorry, miss. If we'd known you were already on the way—" The words reached her ears but made no sense, like a foreign language she'd once studied but never quite mastered. Samuel Morrison, the man who'd written her 3 careful letters over 4 months, the man who'd promised a home, security, a fresh start far from the Boston tenements where she'd nursed her dying mother through a long, cruel winter. The man who'd sent train fare and a simple gold band that was probably brass and told her he wasn't handsome or young, but he was honest and he needed a wife. Dead. There must be some mistake, she heard herself say. I have his letters. He sent money for the ticket. He said— I know what he said, miss. The station master's voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a man who'd delivered bad news before. Morrison was good at saying things, but saying and doing are different matters out here. He didn't leave much behind. Couple horses, some debts, a claim that's more rocks than grass. Nothing that would help you, I'm afraid. The platform tilted beneath her feet. Evelyn reached for the post beside her, gripping it hard enough that splinters bit into her palm. The pain was distant, unimportant. I see, she said, though she didn't see at all. Thank you for telling me. You got people back east? Someone we can wire? The laugh that escaped her was sharp and humorless. People. As if she had anyone left who cared whether she lived or died. Her mother's family had disowned them when she'd married an Irish dock worker 23 years ago. Her father had died when she was 12, crushed between a cargo net and a ship's hull. Her mother had followed him last December, taken by consumption in a charity ward that smelled of carbolic and despair. No, Evelyn said quietly. No people. The station master shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Well, there's a boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Chen runs it. I could have someone take you there, let you figure out what's next. Might be you could find work in town, earn enough for a ticket back. Back to what? A city that had taken everything and given nothing in return? A crowded tenement where she'd scrubbed other people's floors and minded other people's children for pennies? A life measured in survival, never in hope? That's kind of you, she managed. I'll think about it. But the station master was already looking past her, his attention drawn to someone approaching from the street. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw a man striding toward them, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to take up space in the world. He was younger than Morrison's letters had suggested he'd be, perhaps 30, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat stubble. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat that had seen better years, but there was something in the way he carried himself that commanded attention. Not arrogance exactly, more like certainty. "Sam," the man said, nodding to the station master before his gaze shifted to Evelyn. His eyes were the pale gray of a winter sky, and they took her in with a directness that should have been rude but somehow wasn't. "This her?" "This is Miss Harper. Yes, Miss Harper. This is Wyatt Brennan. He ranches about 5 miles out." Wyatt removed his hat, revealing hair pressed flat from the band. "Ma'am, I heard about Morrison. That's a hard thing to travel all this way for." Evelyn lifted her chin, refusing to let this stranger see how completely her world had just shattered. "You knew him?" "Some. We weren't friends, but we shared fence line. He wasn't a bad man, just unlucky. Though I suppose that's not much comfort to you right now." "No," she agreed. "It's not." She expected him to make his excuses and leave. What business was a stranger's ruined future to a man who probably had his own concerns? But Wyatt didn't move. Instead, he studied her with those unsettling gray eyes, as if trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't realized she presented. "You got a place to stay?" he asked finally. "I was just telling her about Mrs. Chen's boarding house," the station master offered. Wyatt made a non-committal sound. "Chen's all right, but she charges Denver prices for a room not much bigger than a horse stall, and her cooking would make a buzzard weep." He looked at Evelyn again. "My sister runs a boarding house on the edge of town. Cleaner rooms, better food, and she won't rob you blind. If you're looking for a place to land while you sort things out, I can take you there." Evelyn's first instinct was to refuse. Her mother had drilled certain rules into her from childhood. Never accept favors from strange men, never put yourself in situations you can't control, never trust easy kindness because it always came with a price. But her mother had also died alone in a charity ward, so perhaps her rules hadn't been as reliable as she'd believed. "Why would you help me?" Evelyn asked bluntly. "You don't know me." Something that might have been approval flickered across Wyatt's weathered face. "No, I don't. But I know what this town is like for a woman alone without money or prospects. And I know my sister's got a good heart in an empty room. Seems simple enough?" "Nothing's simple," Evelyn said. "Not in my experience." "Fair point." Wyatt settled his hat back on his head. "But standing on this platform having this conversation isn't getting you any closer to a solution. My wagon's just over there. I'll take you to Kate's place, introduce you proper, and then you can decide what you want to do. No obligation, no strings, just a meal and a bed for the night." She should say no. Every instinct born from 22 years of hard lessons screamed at her to say no, to protect herself, to trust no one. But she was so tired, tired of being afraid, tired of being alone, tired of every door closing before she could walk through it. "All right," she heard herself say. "Thank you." Wyatt nodded once, then bent to collect her suitcase before she could protest. It wasn't heavy. Everything she owned in the world fit into one battered case, but he carried it as if it were empty, leading her off the platform toward a weathered wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. The town of Salvation Creek spread out before them like a broken promise. The main street was dirt, churned into deep ruts by wagon wheels and hooves. Buildings leaned against each other as if too tired to stand alone. A general store, a saloon with painted windows, a bank that looked more substantial than anything else, a church with a crooked steeple. People moved along the boardwalks, most of them men, all of them casting curious glances at the stranger in travel-stained Eastern clothes climbing into Wyatt Brennan's wagon. "They're staring," Evelyn said quietly. "Always do when something new shows up," Wyatt replied, clicking his tongue to set the horses moving. "Give them a week, and they'll find something else to talk about." "I won't be here a week." He glanced at her. "Where will you be?" "I don't know yet." It was the most honest thing she'd said since stepping off the train. The admission should have frightened her. She'd always had a plan. always known the next step, even when that step led nowhere good. But now there was nothing. Just this moment, this wagon, this stranger who'd shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than the entire city of Boston had managed in 22 years. They rode in silence through streets that thinned into scattered buildings, and finally into open land. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, golden grass rolling like ocean waves in the constant wind. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and impossibly remote. The sky pressed down with terrible beauty. Evelyn had never seen so much empty space in her life. "First time west?" Wyatt asked. "Yes." "What do you think?" She considered lying, offering some polite observation about natural beauty or fresh air. But he'd been honest with her, and that deserved honesty in return. "It's terrifying," she said. "All this space with nothing to hold on to." Wyatt's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months. Most folks who come out here pretend they're not scared, like admitting it would make them weak. And you think it doesn't? I think being scared means you're paying attention. It's the ones who aren't scared that usually end up dead." The casual mention of death should have unsettled her. Instead, it was oddly comforting, a reminder that she wasn't the only one who understood how fragile life was, how quickly everything could change. The boarding house appeared ahead, a two-story structure that looked more solid than most of the buildings in town. Smoke curled from the chimney, and curtains hung in windows that actually had glass. A garden plot showed evidence of recent tending, though this late in the season most of the plants had gone dormant. Wyatt pulled the wagon to a stop and helped her down. His hand was rough and warm through her thin glove, before retrieving her suitcase. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman who could only be Wyatt's sister. She had the same wheat-colored hair, the same strong features, though her eyes were warmer brown instead of gray. She wore a practical dress with an apron tied over it, and flour dusted her hands. "Wyatt," she said. Then her gaze shifted to Evelyn. Understanding dawned immediately. "You're the Morrison bride." "Was," Evelyn corrected quietly. "He's dead." Kate's expression softened. "I heard. I'm sorry." "That's a cruel welcome to Salvation Creek." She stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Come inside. You look half frozen, and I've got coffee on." The interior of the boarding house was clean and warm, smelling of bread and wood smoke. A parlor opened to the left, furnished with mismatched but comfortable-looking chairs. A staircase led up to the second floor. Everything spoke of care and attention, of someone who took pride in creating a home. "Sit," Kate commanded, pointing to the kitchen table. "Both of you." Wyatt obeyed without argument, which told Evelyn something about the family dynamic. She lowered herself into a chair, her back straight despite exhaustion that went deeper than bone. Kate poured coffee into thick mugs and set them on the table along with a plate of sugar cookies that were still warm. "Now," she said, settling into her own chair, "let's talk about what happens next." "I can pay," Evelyn said immediately. "Not much, but I have a little money. Enough for a room for a few days While you what?" Kate asked, not unkindly. "Find work? There's not much in this town for a woman alone, and what there is—" She trailed off delicately. Evelyn understood what she wasn't saying. There were always jobs for women in frontier towns, but they came with costs she wasn't willing to pay. "I can clean, I can cook, I can keep books. My mother made sure I could read and write and cipher. I can sew, though I'm not artistic about it. I can—" "Breathe," Wyatt interrupted. "You can breathe." The gentle command surprised her into silence. She looked at him, this stranger who had no reason to care about her panic, and found something like understanding in his eyes. "You don't have to figure everything out in the next 5 minutes," he said. "You just traveled 3,000 miles to marry a dead man. Maybe give yourself an hour to just be." Kate nodded. "He's right. Finish your coffee. Eat something. I'll show you to a room, and you can rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about tomorrow." It was reasonable advice. It was kind advice. But Evelyn had learned long ago that she couldn't afford to rest, couldn't afford to stop moving, because the moment she did, the world would catch up and crush her. "I need to pay my way," she insisted. "I won't be charity." "Who said anything about charity?" Kate's voice was brisk but warm. "You need a place to stay. I need help running this house, cooking, cleaning, laundry. We can work out an arrangement that suits us both. Room and board in exchange for labor. That's business, not charity." Evelyn studied the other woman's face, searching for pity or condescension or any of the other expressions she'd grown used to seeing. She found neither, just straightforward practicality and what seemed like genuine kindness. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" Kate and Wyatt exchanged a glance that spoke of shared history, shared understanding. When Kate spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in a place that doesn't want you," she said. "I came here 10 years ago as a bride too. My husband died of fever our first winter. I was 18, pregnant, and 3 months later I lost the baby too. This town looked at me the same way they're looking at you, like a problem nobody wanted to solve." She reached across the table and covered Evelyn's hand with her own, flour-dusted fingers, warm and strong. "Wyatt helped me then," Kate continued. "Built this house with his own hands so I'd have a way to support myself. Scared off the men who thought a widow was easy prey. Never asked for anything in return except that I pass it forward when I could. So that's what I'm doing, passing it forward." Evelyn felt something crack in her chest, some defensive wall she'd built so carefully over the years. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I don't know how to thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet," Kate said with a wry smile. "Wait until you've scrubbed your first batch of sheets from the cowboys who think bathing is optional. You might change your mind about my kindness." Despite everything, despite the long journey and the dead man and the shattered future, Evelyn felt her mouth curve into something that might have been a smile. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow's soon enough. For now, let me show you your room." Kate led her upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. It held a bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a clean basin and pitcher, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the prairie. It wasn't much, but it was clean and private and more than she'd had in Boston. "I'll bring up some hot water," Kate said. "You can wash and rest. Supper's at 6. Come down if you're hungry. Stay up here if you'd rather be alone. No judgment either way." After Kate left, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They were red and rough from years of hard work, the nails cut short and practical. Not a lady's hands, not a bride's hands. Just the hands of a woman who'd survived and who would have to keep surviving. She thought about Samuel Morrison, the man she'd never met and now never would. She'd read his letters so many times she could recite them from memory. He'd written about his ranch, about the land, about wanting someone to share it with. He'd been honest about his age, 42, and about his limitations. "I'm not a romantic man," he'd written, "but I'm steady and I keep my word. I'll provide for you and treat you decent. That's the best I can promise." It hadn't been passion or poetry, but it had been honest. And honesty had seemed like enough when the alternative was slow starvation in a city that ground people up without noticing. Now he was dead, shot over a card game, and she was here in a stranger's house, dependent on the kindness of people she had no right to expect anything from. The unfairness of it should have made her angry. Instead, she just felt tired. She lay back on the bed, still wearing her traveling clothes, and stared at the ceiling. Through the window, she could hear the wind moving through grass, a sound like whispered secrets. So different from the noise of Boston, the clatter of carriages, the shouts of vendors, the constant press of humanity. She should have been planning, should have been figuring out her next move, calculating her resources, mapping out survival. Instead, she closed her eyes and let exhaustion drag her under. When she woke, the light had changed. The sun hung lower, painting the room in shades of amber and rose. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory returned with the weight of stone. Colorado. Salvation Creek. Dead groom. Borrowed kindness. She sat up, smoothing her hair and checking her appearance in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd traveled too far on too little hope and found nothing waiting at the end. But Kate had offered work, and work was something Evelyn understood. Work had rules and expectations and outcomes you could measure. Work made sense when nothing else did. She descended the stairs to find Kate in the kitchen, stirring something that smelled of beef and onions and spices that made Evelyn's empty stomach clench with hunger. "Good timing," Kate said without turning around. "Stew's almost ready. Can you set the table? Plates are in that cupboard, silverware in the drawer below." Evelyn moved to obey, grateful for the simple task. As she worked, Kate kept up a stream of comfortable conversation. Nothing about Morrison or dead futures, just easy talk about the town and its rhythms, the other boarders who'd be arriving for supper, the quirks of frontier life. "We've got 3 regulars right now," Kate explained. "Mr. Chen runs the laundry. Yes, he's married to the other boarding house owner. Long story. Then there's Tom Bailey. He's a clerk at the general store. And Sam Whitmore, who does odd jobs around town. All of them decent men, but I'll give you the same warning I give every woman who works here. You don't owe any man anything beyond basic courtesy. If any of them gets ideas, you tell me immediately." "All right," Evelyn said, filing the information away. The door opened and Wyatt walked in, followed by 3 other men. They removed their hats and nodded politely to Evelyn, who found herself being assessed by 3 pairs of curious eyes. "Gentlemen," Kate said firmly, "this is Miss Harper. She'll be helping me run the house. I expect you to treat her with respect and mind your manners." "Yes, ma'am," they chorused, with the resigned tone of men who'd learned not to argue with Kate Brennan. Supper was simple but good. Beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread, apple pie for dessert. The men ate with focus and minimal conversation, clearly used to the routine. Evelyn picked at her food, her stomach uncertain after the day's upheavals. Wyatt sat across from her, eating steadily, but without the single-minded intensity of the other men. Occasionally she'd catch him watching her with those pale gray eyes, but whenever she met his gaze, he'd look away without embarrassment. After supper, the boarders retreated to their rooms or the parlor. Kate shooed Evelyn away from the dishes. "You've had a long day. Tomorrow you can help with breakfast and start earning your keep. Tonight, just rest." But Evelyn found herself drawn to the parlor, where Wyatt sat alone in a chair by the window, reading a newspaper by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Haven't tried yet." He nodded, folding the paper. "It's a lot to take in. This whole territory is different from what you're used to." Evelyn sat in the chair opposite him, proper distance maintained. "Tell me about your ranch." It was partly genuine curiosity, partly a need to fill the silence with something other than her own thoughts. Wyatt studied her for a moment, as if trying to determine whether she really wanted to know or was just being polite. "It's small," he said finally. "About 200 acres, maybe 60 head of cattle. I run it with 2 hands, Miguel and his son Carlos. They're good men, hard workers. We do all right, most years." "And you're not married?" The question was too direct, too personal, but she was too exhausted to care about propriety. "No," Wyatt said simply. "Came close once, but it didn't work out. Been too busy building the ranch to think much about it since." "That's what Morrison said in his letters," Evelyn said, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "Too busy for romance, just needed someone practical." "And you answered that letter because—" She could have lied, could have painted herself as some romantic fool chasing adventure. But Wyatt's gray eyes saw too much, and she was tired of pretending. "Because practical was all I had to offer," she said quietly. "Because I was cold and hungry and watching my mother die by inches in a city that didn't care. Because a loveless marriage with a roof and food seemed better than slowly starving while pretending I still had dignity." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Wyatt didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just nodded slowly, as if what she'd said made perfect sense. "That's honest," he said finally, "more honest than most folks would be." "Honesty's free. Might as well spend what I can afford." His mouth quirked. "Is that how you see the world? Everything's got a price?" "Doesn't it?" Evelyn challenged. "Your sister's kindness costs my labor. Your help today will probably cost something I haven't figured out yet. Nothing's truly free." "Maybe not," Wyatt agreed, "but maybe some costs are worth paying." Before she could ask what he meant, he stood and gathered his hat. "I should head back. Ranch doesn't run itself." He paused at the door. "Kate's good people, Miss Harper. Whatever arrangement you work out with her will be fair. And if you need anything, anything at all, you can send word through town. I come in most weeks for supplies." "Why would I need anything from you?" He settled his hat on his head, shadows from the lamp cutting sharp angles across his face. "Maybe you won't," he said, "but the offer stands anyway." After he left, Evelyn sat alone in the parlor, listening to the wind and the settling sounds of an unfamiliar house. In Boston, night had meant different sounds, shouts from the street, footsteps in the hallway above, the constant reminder that you were never truly alone even when you were desperately lonely. Here, the quiet was profound, unsettling, full of space and possibility and a fear she couldn't quite name. She thought about Wyatt Brennan's offer, the way he'd looked at her, not with pity, but with something like recognition, as if he saw someone who understood what it meant to survive. She thought about Kate's hands, warm and flower-dusted and strong. She thought about the endless prairie and the terrible sky, and the way this land seemed to swallow sound and hope and certainty. And she thought about Samuel Morrison, a man she'd never met who'd promised her a practical future and delivered nothing but absence. Tomorrow, she would start figuring out what came next. Tomorrow she would work and plan and build whatever life she could from these ruins. But tonight, in this borrowed room in a stranger's house, Evelyn Harper let herself feel everything she'd been holding back since the station master delivered his news. She cried silently into her pillow, mourning not the man she'd never known, but the future she'd dared to imagine. A home, security, the end of always being afraid. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out but strangely lighter, as if she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. The wind whispered against the window, carrying secrets she couldn't understand yet. But she was here. She'd survived the journey, survived the news, survived another day in a life that seemed determined to break her. And if she'd survived this long, maybe, just maybe, she could survive a little longer. Morning would bring work and decisions and the hard business of building a future from nothing. But for now, Evelyn Harper closed her eyes and let the strange sounds of the frontier carry her into restless sleep, where she dreamed of endless skies and a stranger's gray eyes, and the possibility that sometimes being too late for one thing meant arriving exactly on time for something else. Dawn came early to the high country, spilling through Evelyn's window with a persistence that pulled her from dreams she couldn't quite remember. For a moment, she lay still beneath the unfamiliar weight of the patchwork quilt, listening to sounds that had no place in her memory: the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of wagon wheels on hard-packed earth, birdsong that seemed both sweeter and lonelier than anything she'd heard in Boston's crowded streets. Then yesterday crashed back into her consciousness with brutal clarity. She rose and dressed quickly, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency. Her traveling dress was wrinkled beyond help, but she smoothed it as best she could. First impressions might be ruined, but second chances could still be salvaged with hard work. The boarding house was already stirring when she descended. She found Kate in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, her hair caught up in a loose knot and her apron dusted with flour. "Morning," Kate said without looking up. "Coffee's on the stove. Pour yourself a cup and then start cracking eggs. We've got 6 hungry men to feed, and they'll be down in 20 minutes expecting miracles." Evelyn poured coffee and moved to the eggs, falling into the familiar rhythm of breakfast preparation. Kate worked beside her without unnecessary conversation, and Evelyn found herself grateful for the silence. Some people filled quiet with meaningless chatter. Kate seemed to understand that sometimes work was its own conversation. They had biscuits, eggs, bacon, and fried potatoes on the table when the boarders began trickling down. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who did hard physical labor, speaking little except to ask for more coffee or pass the salt. Wyatt wasn't among them. Evelyn told herself she wasn't disappointed, that it was ridiculous to expect a rancher to eat breakfast at his sister's boarding house when he had his own home miles away. But she caught herself glancing at the door more than once and hated herself for the weakness. After breakfast, Kate set her to washing dishes while the boarders dispersed to their various jobs. The work was familiar, mindless, giving Evelyn's hands something to do while her mind wrestled with larger questions. "You're thinking too hard," Kate observed, drying plates with practiced efficiency. "I can hear the wheels turning from here." "I need to figure out what I'm doing," Evelyn said. "I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely." "Who said anything about indefinitely?" "I said we'd work out an arrangement, room and board in exchange for help around here. That's not kindness, that's business." Kate set down a dried plate and turned to face her. Unless you don't think the work suits you. No, it suits me fine. Evelyn struggled to articulate the unease that had been building since she woke. I don't know anything about this place, this territory, how things work here, how... Then you'll learn, same as everyone else who comes west. Kate's voice was matter-of-fact. You think I knew how to run a boarding house when I got here? I was a merchant's daughter from Philadelphia. My biggest concern was whether my dress matched my shoes. Then life happened, and I learned. Evelyn scrubbed at a stubborn spot on a pan, using the work to hide the emotions she couldn't quite control. Your brother said you lost your husband and a baby. He told you that? Kate's expression flickered with something Evelyn couldn't read. That's not like Wyatt. He usually keeps other people's tragedies to himself. He was explaining why you were helping me, passing it forward, you said. Kate was quiet for a moment, her hand stilling on the dish towel. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than before. James, my husband, was a good man, young and healthy and full of plans. We were going to build something together, make a real life out here. She resumed drawing, but her movements were slower now, weighted with memory. Then he got a fever, and 3 days later he was gone. I was pregnant and alone, and this town looked at me like I was a problem that needed solving. Some of the men thought that meant marrying me off quick to whoever would take me. Some of the women thought I should go back east where I belonged. But you stayed. I stayed. Kate's smile was thin but real. Because Wyatt reminded me that I'd come here to build something, and just because James was gone didn't mean I had to give up on that. He helped me build this place, and I built a life. Not the one I planned, but a good one anyway. Evelyn absorbed this, understanding what Kate wasn't saying, that loss didn't have to mean the end of everything, that futures could be rebuilt from ruins if you were stubborn enough to try. I don't know how to be stubborn, she admitted quietly. I only know how to survive. Then that's where you start, Kate said simply. Surviving today, tomorrow can wait. The morning passed in a blur of work, stripping beds, hauling water, scrubbing floors. Evelyn's hands ached and her back protested, but the physical labor was almost comforting in its familiarity. This, at least, she understood. She was hanging sheets on the line behind the house when she heard wagon wheels and looked up to see Wyatt pulling to a stop in front of the boarding house. He climbed down with easy grace and headed inside, not seeing her amid the billowing laundry. Curiosity drew her back to the kitchen door, where she could hear voices without being obvious about eavesdropping. Not a good idea, Wyatt, Kate was saying, her tone sharp with concern. You barely know her. I know enough. Wyatt's voice was calm, unmoved by his sister's worry. She needs work and I need help. It's practical. It's complicated. You're asking a city girl who's never spent a day on a ranch to come live 5 miles from town with a man she doesn't know. What kind of reputation will that give her? A better one than if she stays here taking in laundry for pennies, Wyatt countered. At least at the ranch she'll have real wages and her own space. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Were they talking about her? And what are you getting out of this? Kate demanded. Don't tell me you're doing this out of pure charity. I'm doing it because the ranch is falling apart without Ma, and I can't run cattle and keep house at the same time. Miguel's wife helps some, but she's got her own family to look after. I need someone full-time. A pause. And maybe because I remember what it's like to need a chance and have someone actually give you one. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Finally, Kate sighed. You're determined to do this? I am. Then at least let me be there when you ask her. And Wyatt? If she says no, you accept it. No persuading, no pushing. Her choice. Her choice, he agreed. Evelyn backed away from the door quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was smoothing down her apron and pretending to inspect the sheets when Kate called her name. Inside, she found them both at the kitchen table. Wyatt stood when she entered, hat in hands, and gestured to a chair. Miss Harper, I have a proposition for you. She sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. I'm listening. My ranch needs help. Cooking, cleaning, keeping the books. My mother used to handle all that, and since she passed last spring, it's been chaos. I'm a rancher, not a housekeeper, and it shows. He met her eyes directly. I'm offering you employment. Room and board and a separate cabin on the property, plus wages. $20 a month to start. $20. Evelyn's mind raced through the calculation. That was more than she'd made in 3 months scrubbing floors in Boston. Enough to save, enough to build something. But Kate's concerns echoed in her thoughts. Living alone on a ranch with a man she didn't know, the implications, the risks. Why me? She asked. You could hire someone from town, someone who knows the territory. Could, Wyatt agreed, but the women in town who'd take the job are mostly married or have families. You need work, and you need it now. And Kate says you're smart and capable, which is more than I can say for most of the candidates I'd find otherwise. I don't know anything about ranching. Don't need you to. I've got hands for the cattle work. I need someone who can make the house livable and keep track of expenses and supplies. Can you do that? Could she? Evelyn thought about her mother's meticulous record-keeping, the skills she'd learned watching pennies stretch into meals, making every dollar count because there was never enough. Yes, she said. I can do that. Then we have a deal? I want to see the ranch first, Evelyn said, surprising herself with the boldness. And I want the terms in writing, including my wages and the fact that I can leave any time I choose. Something like approval flickered across Wyatt's weathered face. Fair enough. I can take you out there this afternoon, show you around. If you don't like what you see, no obligation. She looked at Kate, who gave a small nod of encouragement. All right, Evelyn said. Show me. 2 hours later, she sat beside Wyatt in his wagon as they rattled out of Salvation Creek toward the open prairie. The town fell away quickly, swallowed by the vastness of grass and sky. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with early snow. How long have you had the ranch? She asked, partly to fill the silence, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. 8 years. Started with nothing but a land claim and more ambition than sense. Wyatt kept his eyes on the road. Built the house myself that first year, nearly froze to death that first winter, but I was stubborn. Kate said stubbornness runs in your family. She's not wrong. A pause. Our parents came west when I was 15. Kate was 10. They wanted land of their own, a fresh start. Pa died building the ranch. Tree fell wrong during clearing. Ma raised us the rest of the way, worked herself near to death, keeping things going. I'm sorry. Don't be. They lived the life they chose, and they didn't regret it. That's more than most people can say. He glanced at her. What about your people? What brought them to Boston? My mother's family disowned her for marrying my father. He was Irish, worked the docks. They lived in a tenement in the North End and made do as best they could. Evelyn watched the landscape roll past. He died when I was 12. Dock accident. After that, it was just me and Ma, taking whatever work we could find. Must have been hard. It was life. We survived. She heard the defensive edge in her voice and softened it. She taught me to read and write and keep accounts. Said education was the only thing no one could take from you. Smart woman. She was. Didn't save her in the end, though. Consumption doesn't care how smart you are. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the endless whisper of wind through grass. Evelyn found herself adjusting to the rhythm of it, the way the landscape stretched in ways that should have been monotonous, but somehow wasn't. There, Wyatt said finally, pointing ahead. Brennan Ridge Ranch spread across a shallow valley, framed by rolling hills and backed by a line of cottonwoods that marked a creek. The main house was modest but solid, rough-hewn logs chinked with clay, a stone chimney, a covered porch. Nearby stood a barn, a chicken coop, several corrals, and what looked like a smaller cabin set back from the main buildings. As they approached, Evelyn could see the evidence of neglect Wyatt had mentioned. The porch sagged slightly. Weeds had taken over what might once have been a garden. A broken window had been covered with oiled paper instead of glass. 2 men emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled to a stop. The older one was perhaps 50, weather-beaten and lean, with kind eyes and graying hair. The younger was maybe 20, with the same dark coloring and a ready smile. Miguel, Carlos, Wyatt greeted them. This is Miss Harper. She might be taking over the house management. Miguel removed his hat and nodded respectfully. Miss. Is good to meet you. You as well, Evelyn said, noting the slight accent and the way Miguel's English, while functional, wasn't native. Carlos and I, we handle the cattle and the land, Miguel explained. But the house, he gestured expressively, a movement that conveyed both apology and resignation. My Maria, she try to help, but she have our 4 niños in her own home is too much. I understand, Evelyn said. Wyatt helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the house. Up close, the neglect was even more apparent. The porch boards needed replacing. The door hung slightly crooked. When he pushed it open, she stepped into a bachelor's chaos. Dishes were piled in a dry sink. Dust coated every surface. Papers covered a rough-hewn table in no discernible order. Clothes hung from chairs and pegs in a haphazard collection. The stone fireplace was clean, at least, but the rest of the room looked like a storm had passed through and never quite settled. It's bad, Wyatt said without preamble. I know it's bad. I work from sunup to sundown with the cattle, and by the time I get back here, I'm too tired to do more than heat beans and fall into bed. Evelyn walked slowly through the space, taking inventory. The bones of the house were good, solid construction, well-placed windows, a functional layout, but it desperately needed a woman's touch, or at least the touch of anyone who cared about making a house into a home. The separate cabin you mentioned? She asked. Wyatt led her out the back door and across a short stretch of yard to the smaller building. Inside, she found a single room with a bed, a small stove, a table and chair, and a window that looked toward the mountains. It was sparse but clean. Clearly, Wyatt had made some effort here, knowing he'd be showing it to her. It was Ma's sewing room originally, he explained, but I fixed it up after she passed, thinking I might eventually need to hire help. There's a lock on the door. You'd have complete privacy. Evelyn examined the space critically. It was small but sufficient. More importantly, it was separate from the main house, a crucial detail that would protect her reputation and her safety. Show me the books, she said. Back in the main house, Wyatt cleared a space at the table and produced a battered ledger and a stack of receipts and invoices in various states of organization. Evelyn sat down and began sorting through them, her practiced eye quickly identifying the chaos. Expenses were recorded haphazardly, some dated, some not. Income from cattle sales was mixed in with personal purchases. There was no clear system, no running totals, no way to track whether the ranch was profitable or slowly bleeding money. When was the last time you balanced these? She asked. Wyatt had the grace to look embarrassed. Define balanced. That's what I thought. Evelyn continued examining the records, making mental notes. This is going to take time to sort out, but it's manageable. So you'll take the job? She looked up at him, this stranger who was offering her a lifeline without fully understanding why she needed it so desperately. His gray eyes were direct but not demanding, patient in a way that suggested he understood she needed to make this decision without pressure. I have conditions, she said. Name them. First, I want everything in writing, my wages, my duties, the terms of employment. Second, I need 1 day a week to myself. I'll go into town, see Kate, have time away from the ranch. Third, if either of us wants to end this arrangement, we give 2 weeks' notice. That's fair to both of us. Wyatt nodded slowly. Agreed. Anything else? Yes. Evelyn held his gaze. I need to know you understand that this is strictly employment. I'm not here to be courted or convinced into something more. I'm here to work. Understood, Wyatt said simply. I need a housekeeper and a bookkeeper, not a wife. I learned that lesson already. The reference to his past piqued her curiosity, but she didn't press. They'd both lost futures to circumstance. That shared understanding was enough for now. Then I accept, she said. When do you want me to start? Tomorrow too soon? Despite everything, the strangeness of the situation, the uncertainty of the future, the 1,000 ways this could go wrong, Evelyn felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Tomorrow's fine, she said. They returned to town as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Wyatt promised to have the written agreement ready by morning and to collect her after breakfast. At Kate's boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon with that same careful courtesy. Thank you, Evelyn said, for the opportunity. Thank me when you've seen what you're getting into, Wyatt replied with a wry smile. You might change your mind after a week of sorting through my disaster. Inside, she found Kate in the kitchen preparing supper. Her friend, and Evelyn realized with some surprise that Kate had become a friend, looked up with anxious eyes. Well, Kate asked. I took the job. Kate set down her knife. Are you sure? It's not too late to, I'm sure. Evelyn sat at the table, suddenly exhausted. It's practical work for fair wages. That's more than I had 2 days ago. Practical. Kate's voice was dry. Is that all it is? What else would it be? Evelyn. Kate sat across from her, her expression serious. My brother is a good man, but he's also a man. You'll be living on his property, working in his house, seeing him every day. These things have a way of becoming complicated. He was very clear that this is just employment, Evelyn said, and I made it equally clear that's all I'm interested in. And you believe that will hold? That proximity won't change things? Evelyn thought about the question honestly. Did she believe it? Could two people live in such close quarters and maintain purely professional boundaries? I believe we're both practical people who understand what we're agreeing to, she said finally. Beyond that, I can't predict the future. But I need this, Kate. I need work and wages and a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. Kate studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but promise me something? What? If anything happens that makes you uncomfortable, anything at all, you come to me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone. Don't convince yourself you're overreacting. You promise me that. I promise. That night, Evelyn packed her meager belongings back into her suitcase and tried to quiet the nervous energy that kept her awake. Tomorrow she would start again, building a new life from the wreckage of the old one. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt almost calm. Morning arrived with clear skies and crisp air that promised autumn's approach. Wyatt appeared after breakfast with the written agreement, 2 copies, one for each of them, outlining terms exactly as they discussed. Evelyn read through both carefully before signing, then kept her copy folded in her pocket like a talisman. The ride back to the ranch felt different this time, less like entering unknown territory, more like approaching something that might eventually feel like home. Miguel and Carlos were working near the barn when they arrived. The older man waved and called out something in Spanish to his son. Wyatt responded in the same language, easy and fluent, which surprised Evelyn. You speak Spanish? She asked as he helped her down. Enough to get by. Miguel's been teaching me since he started working here. Seemed only fair to meet him halfway. He collected her suitcase. Let me show you to your cabin, then we can figure out where to start. The cabin was exactly as she remembered. Small, clean, private. Evelyn set her suitcase on the bed and looked around, trying to make it feel real. This was hers. Not borrowed, not temporary. A space she could claim, however modest. I'll let you settle in, Wyatt said from the doorway. When you're ready, come on over to the house. Fair warning, it looks worse in daylight. He wasn't wrong. Walking into the main house in full morning sun was like seeing a battlefield after the fighting ended. Everything was worse than she'd remembered. More dishes, more dust, more evidence of a man who'd given up trying to maintain order. But Evelyn had spent her whole life making order from chaos. This was just another challenge. She rolled up her sleeves. The first day, she focused on making the kitchen functional. She washed every dish, scrubbed every surface, organized the limited supplies into something resembling sense. It took hours, but by the time Wyatt came in for supper, she had a clean workspace and a simple meal ready. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread and coffee, but hot and edible. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformation. I can see the table, he said with something like wonder. That was the goal, Evelyn replied, ladling beans into bowls. Sit, eat while it's hot. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence, broken only by practical questions about supplies and preferences. Wyatt wasn't much for conversation, but his few words were genuine, and Evelyn found herself appreciating the lack of empty chatter. After supper, she returned to her cabin as darkness fell, her body aching from the day's work, but her mind oddly content. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the main house windows, could imagine Wyatt settling into whatever evening routine he maintained. This was her life now. Strange and uncertain and nothing like what she'd imagined, but somehow, impossibly, it felt right. The days fell into rhythm. Evelyn rose at dawn and worked through the house systematically, one room, one task at a time. She scrubbed years of bachelor neglect from floors and walls. She organized the jumbled papers into a coherent bookkeeping system. She planted fall vegetables in the overgrown garden plot. Wyatt kept his distance, respecting her space and their agreement. But sometimes she'd catch him watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not attraction exactly, but something like gratitude mixed with surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe his luck. Miguel's wife Maria came by on the third day, a warm-eyed woman with 4 children ranging from 12 years old down to a toddler. She brought fresh tortillas and shy smiles, clearly relieved that someone was finally bringing order to Wyatt's household. "Is good you're here," Maria said in careful English. "Senor Wyatt, he is good man, but he lived like—" She made a gesture that needed no translation. "Like a wild animal?" Evelyn suggested with a smile. Maria laughed. "See, exactly." The 2 youngest children, a boy of about 6 and a girl maybe 8, approached Evelyn shyly while the adults talked. "Can you read?" the girl asked in English clearer than her mother's. "I can," Evelyn confirmed. "Will you teach us?" "Mama tries, but she doesn't know all the letters." Evelyn looked at Maria, who shrugged apologetically. "I learn little bit, but not enough for teaching." "I could teach them," Evelyn heard herself offer. "If you'd like, maybe an hour in the afternoons?" Maria's face lit up. "You would do this?" "I would." And she realized she meant it. She'd spent years in Boston watching immigrant children struggle without education, unable to help. Here, maybe she could make a difference. That afternoon, she cleared space at the kitchen table and began teaching letters to Rosa and Mateo, while their younger siblings played nearby. They were eager students, hungry for knowledge in a way that reminded her of her own childhood desperation to learn. When Wyatt came in and found them bent over slates, practicing letters, he stopped and watched from the doorway. "Didn't know school teaching was part of your job," he said quietly. "It's not," Evelyn replied. "But they asked, and I said yes. Is that a problem?" "No." He hung his hat on a peg. No problem at all. The weeks passed. Evelyn transformed chaos into order, one task at a time. The house began to look lived in rather than merely survived in. The garden produced late vegetables. The accounts balanced for the first time in months, revealing that the ranch was actually profitable. Wyatt just hadn't known it. And somewhere in the rhythm of work and routine, something unexpected happened. She began to feel at home, not just in the physical space, though the cabin had become her sanctuary, but in the life itself, the early mornings and hard work, the simple meals shared across a clean table, the satisfaction of building something tangible from her labor. She caught herself humming while she worked, smiling at small victories, looking forward to tomorrow. It was dangerous, this contentment. Dangerous to let her guard down, to start believing this could last. Every time she felt herself settling in too comfortably, she reminded herself of the terms of their agreement. Employment. That's all this was. But late at night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to coyotes sing to distant stars, she couldn't quite convince herself that employment was all she wanted it to be. The first frost came in late October, painting the prairie grass silver in the early morning light. Evelyn stood on the porch of her cabin, wrapped in a shawl Kate had given her, watching the sun burn away the ice with slow golden fingers. The air bit at her cheeks and made her breath visible, but she found she didn't mind the cold the way she had in Boston. Here, winter felt clean somehow, honest in its harshness. She'd been at Brennan Ridge for 6 weeks now, and the transformation was remarkable. The main house gleamed with care, every surface scrubbed and polished. The garden had yielded its last harvest before the freeze, and the root cellar was stocked with preserved vegetables. The books balanced, the supplies were organized, and even Wyatt's bachelor habits had been tamed into something resembling order. But it was the teaching that had surprised her most. What had started as an hour with Rosa and Mateo had grown into something larger. Word had spread among the Mexican families who worked the surrounding ranches, and now 5 children showed up 3 afternoons a week, eager to learn their letters and numbers. Maria helped translate when needed, and Evelyn found herself discovering a purpose she hadn't known she was seeking. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Wyatt emerged from the barn on his gray gelding, ready for the day's work checking fence lines in the northern pasture. He reined in when he saw her standing there. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding toward the western mountains where dark clouds were building. "Miguel says it'll hit by tomorrow. Could be the first real snow." "The house is ready," Evelyn replied. "I brought in extra wood yesterday." Something shifted in his expression, that look she'd started recognizing, half gratitude and half something deeper he never quite voiced. "You think of everything. That's what you pay me for." "Is it?" The question was quiet, almost lost in the wind. Before she could answer, he touched his hat brim and rode off toward the northern range, leaving her standing on the porch with her heart beating strangely in her chest. She told herself it meant nothing. They'd developed a comfortable working relationship, that was all. The boundary between employer and employee remained clear, professional. The fact that she looked forward to their quiet suppers together, that his rare smiles made something warm unfold in her chest, that she'd started noticing the way lamplight caught in his hair when he bent over the ranch accounts. None of that meant anything she was willing to acknowledge. By afternoon, the children arrived for their lessons, cheeks pink from the cold and voices bright with excitement about the coming storm. Evelyn settled them around the kitchen table with their slates while Maria worked on mending by the fire. "Miss Evelyn?" Rosa asked, carefully forming the letter W. "Did you always want to be a teacher?" The question caught her off guard. "No," she admitted. "I never imagined I'd be a teacher." "Then what did you want to be?" Safe, Evelyn thought. Warm. Not afraid all the time. But she couldn't say that to a child. "I wanted to have a home," she said instead. "A place that was mine." Rosa considered this seriously. "And do you? Have a home now?" Evelyn looked around the kitchen she'd scrubbed and organized, thought about the cabin where she slept peacefully each night, remembered the satisfaction of teaching these eager young minds. "I'm starting to," she said softly. "I think I'm starting to." The lessons continued until the light began to fail. Maria bundled up the children and headed home, promising to keep them there if the storm proved as fierce as expected. Evelyn started preparing supper, falling into the comfortable routine she'd established. Stew from yesterday's pot roast, fresh bread she'd baked that morning, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Wyatt came in just as she was setting the table, stomping snow from his boots and bringing the smell of cold air and horses with him. "It's starting," he announced, hanging up his coat. "Won't be much tonight, but tomorrow could be bad." Miguel and Carlos are securing everything that might blow away. They ate in their usual companionable silence, but tonight something felt different. The approaching storm made the house feel smaller, more intimate. The wind had picked up, rattling the windows and moaning around the eaves. When Evelyn rose to clear the dishes, Wyatt stopped her with a hand on her arm. The touch was brief, proper, but it sent heat racing through her veins. "Leave them," he said. "Sit with me a minute." She should have refused, should have maintained the careful distance they'd preserved for 6 weeks. Instead, she sat back down, folding her hands in her lap to keep them steady. Wyatt stared into his coffee cup as if reading fortunes in the dark liquid. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something she couldn't name. "I need to tell you something." Dread coiled in Evelyn's stomach. This was it. He was going to end their arrangement, tell her she'd done something wrong, send her back to town with her carefully saved wages and nowhere to go. "All right," she managed. "When you first came here, I told you I needed a housekeeper, someone to bring order to the chaos." He looked up, and his gray eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. That was true, but it's not the whole truth anymore. "Wyatt, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "These past weeks, watching you transform this place, seeing you with those kids, sitting across from you every evening." He stopped, searching for words. "You've brought something back to this ranch that I didn't even realize was missing. Not just cleanliness or organization, something warmer than that. Something that feels like—" "Don't," Evelyn interrupted, standing abruptly. "Don't say whatever you're about to say." "Why not?" "Because we had an agreement, employment. That's all this is." "Is it?" He stood too, his chair scraping against the floor. Is that really all it is, Evelyn? The use of her first name, which he'd carefully avoided until now, felt like a boundary crossed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear and something dangerously close to hope warring in her chest. It has to be, she said desperately. I can't. I won't be another obligation, another thing you have to take care of. Who said anything about obligation? Wyatt moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I'm not talking about duty or responsibility. I'm talking about what's been growing between us, whether we acknowledge it or not. Nothing's been growing. We work together. That's all. Then why do you smile when you hear me coming in for supper? Why do I find myself looking for excuses to be in the house when you're working? Why does this place feel empty on the days you go to town? Each question landed like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through her carefully constructed defenses. Because she did smile when she heard his boots on the porch. Because she'd started wearing her better dress on Tuesdays when she knew he'd be working the near pastures. Because leaving for her weekly visits to Kate felt less like freedom and more like temporary exile from something precious. It doesn't matter, she whispered. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it is, I can't risk this. I need this job, this stability. If I let it become something else, and it falls apart, who says it would fall apart? Everything falls apart. The words burst out of her with surprising violence. Every single thing I've ever tried to build has crumbled. My father died. My mother died. The man I traveled 3,000 miles to marry was dead before I arrived. I can't survive another collapse, Wyatt. I can't. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind howling around the house and the pop of logs in the fire. Wyatt stood very still, his expression gentling into something that looked dangerously like understanding. I'm not asking you to risk everything, he said quietly. I'm not proposing marriage or demanding promises. I'm just asking for honesty about what we both feel. What I feel is afraid, Evelyn admitted, her voice breaking. All the time. Afraid that this will end, that I'll lose this place I've started to call home, that I'll have to start over again with nothing. Then let me be clear about one thing. Wyatt's voice was steady, certain. No matter what happens between us, no matter what you decide or don't decide, your place here is secure. The job is yours for as long as you want it. That won't change. You can't promise that. I just did. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a loose strand of hair back from her face. The gesture was achingly tender. I know you've been hurt. I know you've learned to expect the worst because that's what you've always gotten. But Evelyn, not everyone will abandon you. Not everyone will leave. Tears burned behind her eyes, hot and unwelcome. How can you possibly know that? Because I understand what it means to build something worth keeping, and I don't walk away from things that matter. His hand dropped back to his side. You matter. Whether you're my housekeeper or something more, you matter. The wind rattled the windows hard enough to make them both jump. Outside, snow was beginning to fall in earnest, thick flakes swirling in the lamplight from the windows. I should go, Evelyn said, though she made no move toward the door. Before the storm gets worse. Stay. Wyatt gestured toward the fire. Just for a while. We don't have to talk about this anymore if you don't want to. We can just sit. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to retreat to the safety of her cabin and the clarity of distance. But something stronger than instinct kept her rooted to the floor. All right, she heard herself say, for a while. They settled into chairs by the fire, not touching but close enough that she was acutely aware of his presence. The storm built outside, transforming the world into a white fury beyond the windows. Inside, the house felt like a refuge against more than just the weather. Tell me about the woman you almost married, Evelyn said after a long silence. If he was going to demand honesty, she would demand it in return. Wyatt's jaw tightened, but he didn't deflect. Her name was Catherine, merchant's daughter from Denver. We met when I was buying breeding stock, started corresponding. She came out to visit, seemed charmed by the ranch life. What happened? She realized that ranch life in letters is different from ranch life in reality. The isolation, the hard work, the lack of society and culture. It wasn't what she'd imagined. His smile was bitter. She went back to Denver and married a banker within 6 months. That must have hurt. It did. But looking back, I think what hurt most was realizing she'd fallen in love with an idea of me, not the actual man. The romantic notion of a Western rancher, not the reality of mud and manure and months of brutal work. Evelyn absorbed this, understanding more than he probably realized. Is that why you were so clear about what you wanted from me? No romance, just practical arrangement? Partly. I figured if I kept everything transactional, I couldn't be disappointed. He looked at her directly. I was wrong about that. Wyatt, I'm not pressing, I'm just being honest, like you asked. He leaned back in his chair, studying the fire. You're nothing like Catherine. You don't romanticize this life or pretend it's something it's not. You work harder than anyone I've ever known. You don't complain when things are difficult, and you've made this house into a home without even trying. That's not nothing, Evelyn. That's everything I didn't know I was looking for. Her throat felt tight. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He stood, collecting his hat. Storm's getting worse. I should check on the animals one more time before it gets too bad to see. You should head to your cabin while you still can. Evelyn stood too, something like panic fluttering in her chest at the thought of him going out into that white fury. Be careful. Always am. He paused at the door, looking back at her. Think about what I said. Not tonight. You're too tired and the storm's making everything feel more dramatic than it is. But when things are calm again, think about whether what we have really is just employment. Because I don't think it is. And I don't think you do either. Then he was gone, swallowed by snow and darkness, leaving her standing alone in the warm house with her heart racing and her carefully constructed walls crumbling around her. She cleaned up the supper dishes mechanically, her mind spinning. Everything he'd said echoed in her thoughts, refusing to be dismissed or rationalized away. The truth was inescapable. Somewhere between scrubbing floors and teaching children, between shared meals and comfortable silences, she'd started falling for Wyatt Brennan. Not the desperate, grasping feeling she'd had for Samuel Morrison, who'd represented safety more than affection. This was different, deeper. Wyatt saw her clearly, saw her fears and her strength, her practicality and her dreams. And somehow, that hadn't sent him running. Instead, it had drawn him closer. And terrifying as it was to admit, she'd been drawn to him too. To his quiet competence, his unexpected gentleness, the way he treated her like an equal rather than a charity case or a conquest. The way his rare smiles transformed his weathered face into something almost beautiful. The wind screamed around the house with renewed fury. Through the window, she could barely see the barn, just a dark shape in the swirling white. Wyatt was out there somewhere, checking on animals, making sure everything was secured, caring for the things that mattered to him. The thought made her chest ache with something that felt dangerously close to longing. She finished the dishes and banked the fire, then bundled into her coat for the short walk to her cabin. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her eyes water. Snow stung her face and filled her boots within steps. She bent her head against the wind and pushed forward, counting steps to keep from losing her way. A hand caught her arm, and she gasped, spinning to find Wyatt beside her, materialized out of the storm like a phantom. Can't make it to your cabin, he shouted over the wind. Too dangerous. Stay in the house tonight. She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage the short distance. But even as she thought it, a gust of wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Wyatt's arm around her waist was the only thing that kept her upright. They staggered back to the house together, fighting for every step. By the time they fell through the door, they were both coated in snow and gasping for breath. Wyatt slammed the door against the wind and stood there panting, melting snow dripping from his coat. That came up faster than I expected, he said, stripping off his outer layers. Storm like this, you can't be in a separate building. If something happened, if the cabin caught fire, or a tree fell, or you got sick, I'd never know. Evelyn removed her own coat with shaking hands. Whether from cold or the implications of spending the night in the house with him, she wasn't sure. Where should I? My mother's room, Wyatt said immediately. It's the warmest, closest to the fire. I'll sleep out here by the hearth. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. Your reputation matters, even if there's no one here to see. The bedroom is yours. He showed her to a room off the main living space, clearly once a woman's sanctuary. A quilt-covered bed, a dresser with a brush and mirror still on top, curtains that had faded from what must have been cheerful yellow. The dust had been cleaned away, probably part of Evelyn's own work weeks ago, but the room still held echoes of the woman who'd lived here. "I'll get you something to sleep in," Wyatt said, disappearing before she could respond. He returned with a flannel shirt, clean and worn soft. "It's not proper ladies' nightclothes, but it's warm." "Thank you." Evelyn took the shirt, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The touch was electric, sending sparks up her arm. Wyatt felt it too. She saw it in the way his eyes darkened, the way his breath caught. For a suspended moment they stood there in the doorway of his mother's room, the storm howling outside and something equally tempestuous building in the charged air between them. Then he stepped back, deliberately breaking the spell. "Sleep well," he said quietly. "Call if you need anything." After he closed the door, Evelyn stood in the middle of the room, clutching the flannel shirt and trying to steady her breathing. Through the walls, she could hear him moving around, preparing his makeshift bed by the fire. She changed into the shirt, which fell to her knees and smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke and something indefinably Wyatt. The scent should have felt intrusive. Instead, it was oddly comforting, like being wrapped in safety. She climbed into bed but couldn't sleep. The storm raged outside, rattling the shutters and piling snow against the walls. Inside, her mind raced through everything Wyatt had said, everything she'd felt, all the careful defenses she'd built to protect herself from exactly this situation. What terrified her most wasn't the possibility that he might hurt her. It was the possibility that he wouldn't, that this could be real, that she might actually be allowed to have something good without it being ripped away. Hours passed. The fire in the hearth died down and the house grew cold despite the banked coals. Evelyn pulled the quilts tighter and tried to will herself into sleep, but rest remained elusive. A soft knock on the door made her sit up. "Evelyn?" Wyatt's voice was quiet, concerned. "You awake?" "Yes." "Fire's dying and I don't want to stoke it too high. Worried about sparks with this wind, but it's getting cold. You all right in there?" She should say yes, should maintain the boundary of the closed door. Instead, she found herself asking, "Are you cold?" A pause. "Some?" "The bed's large enough for two." The words came out before she could stop them, shocking her with their boldness. "If we keep the quilts between us, just for warmth." The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You sure about that?" Was she? It was improper, potentially dangerous, definitely not what an employee should suggest to her employer. But the alternative was both of them lying awake and freezing in separate rooms while a perfectly good bed went half empty. "I'm sure," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "For practical reasons." "Practical," Wyatt repeated, a hint of wry amusement in his tone. "Right." He opened the door slowly, giving her time to change her mind. He'd wrapped himself in a blanket and looked hesitant in a way she'd never seen from him before. This man who faced down fractious cattle and brutal weather without flinching, uncertain about crossing a bedroom threshold. Evelyn shifted to the far side of the bed, keeping the quilts firmly between them as promised. Wyatt lay down on top of the covers, the blanket wrapped around him, maintaining every possible barrier propriety demanded. For a while they lay in careful silence, not touching, barely breathing. The storm continued its assault on the house, but the shared warmth made the cold less biting. "Evelyn?" Wyatt's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes?" "I meant what I said earlier, about you mattering, about not walking away." A pause. "I know you're scared, but I'm scared too." She turned her head to look at him, though in the darkness she could only make out his silhouette. "Of what?" "Of wanting something this much. Of finally having something good and not knowing how to keep it." His voice was raw with honesty. "Catherine left because I wasn't enough. My parents died before I could prove I'd made something of what they started. And my mother, she told me before she passed that she worried I'd spend my life alone because I was too stubborn to let anyone in." "You're not alone," Evelyn whispered. "I know, because of you." He shifted slightly, not moving closer, but somehow the space between them felt less vast. "These weeks with you here have been the best I've had in years. Coming home to a clean house and a hot meal, sure, but more than that, coming home to someone who sees this life clearly and chooses it anyway. Someone who works beside me instead of waiting for me to make everything perfect. Someone who... He stopped, and in the silence Evelyn found her courage. Someone who what? Someone who makes me want to be more than just a man running a ranch, he finished quietly. Someone who makes me want to build a real future, not just survive season to season. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard she thought surely he could hear it. Every wall she'd built, every defense she'd constructed, was crumbling under the weight of his words and her own traitorous heart. I'm terrified, she admitted into the darkness, of wanting this, of letting myself hope. I know. His hand found hers in the space between them, warm fingers lacing through hers over the quilt. But maybe we could be terrified together. Maybe that's better than being safe and alone. She squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something equally powerful was building, not destructive like the wind, but transformative. The careful distance they'd maintained was dissolving, revealing what had been growing beneath it all along. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to let someone in. Neither do I, Wyatt admitted, but maybe we figure it out together, one day at a time, same as everything else. They lay there in the darkness, hands clasped, the storm howling its fury around them. Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest, not the breaking of her defenses, but the careful, deliberate lowering of them. A choice made not from desperation or necessity, but from something that felt dangerously close to trust. Wyatt. Yeah? Ask me again. What you asked at supper. She felt him tense beside her, heard the catch in his breathing. Ask you what? If this is just employment. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then, carefully, measuring each word, Wyatt asked, Is this just employment to you, Evelyn? She took a breath, let it out slowly. Thought about the past 6 weeks, the careful dance they'd performed, the moments when their eyes had met across the kitchen and something unspoken had passed between them, the way her heart lifted when she heard his boots on the porch, the way this house had stopped feeling like a workplace and started feeling like home. No, she said quietly. It's not. Not anymore. His hand tightened on hers, and she heard him exhale, a sound of relief and wonder, and something that might have been joy. Then what is it? Evelyn turned toward him in the darkness, their faces inches apart, though they still maintained that careful space between their bodies. I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out. If you're willing to give me time. All the time you need, Wyatt promised. We'll go slow. Let this grow honest, the way good things should. No promises, Evelyn warned. I can't make promises about the future. Don't need promises, just need you to be willing to try. I can do that, she said. I think I can do that. They talked through the long night while the storm raged outside, sharing stories they'd never told anyone. Wyatt spoke of his parents' dreams and his own fears of failing them. Evelyn told him about her mother's death, about the desperation that had driven her west, about the morning she'd stepped off that train into a future that had died before she arrived. And slowly, carefully, they began weaving their separate stories into something that might, eventually, become shared. By the time gray dawn light filtered through the windows, the storm had blown itself out. The world beyond the house was transformed, buried under 2 feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the weak sunlight. Inside, something equally transformative had occurred, though its full shape remained to be seen. They rose stiffly, careful not to let the night's intimacy turn awkward. Wyatt built up the fire while Evelyn prepared breakfast, falling into their familiar rhythm, but with a new awareness humming between them. Over coffee, he reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that would have been shocking yesterday, but today felt natural, right. We'll take this slow, he said. I want to court you proper, evening rides when the weather allows. Time to talk, to know each other beyond work. No rushing, no pressure. And if it doesn't work, Evelyn had to ask, if we try this and it falls apart, then we'll face that if it comes. But Evelyn, his gray eyes held hers steadily. I don't think it will. I think we've both been alone long enough to recognize something real when we find it." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this time, this once, the universe might let her keep something precious. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's try." And in the quiet kitchen of a house transformed by care and courage, Wyatt Brennan smiled at her with such warmth that Evelyn Harper felt the last of her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more precious. Hope. The weeks following the storm unfolded with a deliberate slowness that both soothed and tormented Evelyn. True to his word, Wyatt courted her with old-fashioned propriety, evening rides across snow-dusted prairie when the weather allowed, conversations that stretched long into the night by the fire, small gestures that spoke louder than grand declarations. He brought her wildflowers that somehow survived the early winter, their frozen petals thawing in the warmth of the kitchen. He built her a proper desk in the corner of the main house so she could keep the books without hunching over the kitchen table. He listened when she talked about her dreams of opening a real school someday, and didn't dismiss them as impossible. And slowly, carefully, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that perhaps this time the ground beneath her feet wouldn't suddenly give way. Her weekly visits to Kate became confession sessions of sorts. The older woman would pour coffee and listen with knowing eyes as Evelyn tried to articulate the strange mix of joy and terror that came with opening her heart again. "He asked me to go to the church social next month," Evelyn said one gray November afternoon, warming her hands on the coffee cup. As more than his housekeeper." Kate's smile was gentle. "And that frightens you." "It makes it real, makes us public." Evelyn stared into her coffee. "Once everyone knows, there's no taking it back. No pretending it's just a working arrangement." "Would you want to take it back?" The question hit at the heart of Evelyn's fear. Because no, she wouldn't want to take it back. That was the terrifying part. She was falling for Wyatt Brennan with a completeness that left her breathless and vulnerable in ways she'd sworn never to be again. "What if he changes his mind?" The words came out small, ashamed. "What if he wakes up one day and realizes I'm not worth the trouble?" Kate reached across the table and covered Evelyn's hand with her own. "My brother is many things, stubborn, independent, too quiet for his own good sometimes, but he's not fickle. When Wyatt commits to something, he sees it through. And Evelyn, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Catherine." "He told you about her?" "He didn't have to. I saw what her leaving did to him. Watched him pour himself into the ranch like a man trying to outrun heartbreak." Kate's eyes were serious. "But what he feels for you is different. Catherine wanted a fantasy. You see him clearly, the good and the difficult, and you're still here. That means everything to a man like my brother." The church social loomed in Evelyn's mind, equal parts promise and threat. It would be the first time they appeared together as something more than employer and employee. The town would talk, judgments would be made. And once that line was crossed, there would be no hiding behind the safety of professional distance. She was still wrestling with these thoughts when she returned to the ranch that evening to find Wyatt waiting on the porch, his expression troubled. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, alarm spiking through her. "Nothing wrong, exactly, but we need to talk." He held the door open for her. "Come inside, it's getting cold." The kitchen was warm, a fire burning in the hearth and the scent of the stew she'd left simmering filling the air. Wyatt gestured to the table and they sat, but he seemed unable to meet her eyes. "Just say it," Evelyn said, her heart already bracing for impact. "Whatever it is." "I got a letter today, from a rancher up in Montana, fellow named Carson, who I met years back at a cattle auction. He's looking to sell a significant portion of his herd, needs to move them before winter sets in hard up there." Wyatt finally looked at her. "It's a good opportunity, the kind that could expand the ranch significantly, give us a real foothold in the market." "That sounds positive," Evelyn said carefully, waiting for the other boot to drop. "It would require capital I don't quite have. I'd need to take out a loan from the bank in Denver, which means traveling there to meet with them in person, probably being gone for a week, maybe more if the weather turns." Understanding dawned. "You're leaving." "I have to. This kind of opportunity doesn't come twice." His hand reached across the table, palm up, an invitation. "But I wanted to talk to you first. Wanted you to know that me leaving doesn't mean that you're running away, Evelyn finished, placing her hand in his. I do know that, Wyatt. It's just hard. His fingers tightened around hers. I know it's hard. If there was any other way to handle this, I would. But I need to go in person. Need to show the bank that this ranch is a sound investment. Evelyn took a breath, pushing back against the panic that wanted to rise up and swallow her. This was what trust looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to believe despite it. When do you leave? Day after tomorrow. I'll take the train from Salvation Creek. Should be back within 10 days. He searched her face. Will you be all right here? Miguel and Carlos will be around during the day, and you can stay in town with Kate if you'd rather. I'll be fine here, Evelyn interrupted. This is my home too now. I'm not afraid of it. Something in Wyatt's expression softened. No, you're not, are you? You're not afraid of much anymore. I'm afraid of plenty, she corrected. I'm just learning not to let it stop me. They spent that evening planning for his absence. Which supplies would need ordering, what should be done if the weather turned, how to reach him in emergency. Practical conversations that masked the deeper current of emotion running between them. That night, lying in her cabin and staring at the ceiling, Evelyn forced herself to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. She loved him. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably. The realization should have sent her running. Instead, it settled over her like a warm cloak, heavy but not unwelcome. The morning Wyatt left dawned cold and clear. He loaded his saddlebags and stood on the porch, turning his hat in his hands like a nervous boy. You'll write if anything happens, he said. It wasn't a question. I'll write, Evelyn promised. And you'll come back. I'll come back. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his pale eyes. Evelyn, I need to say something before I go. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He took a breath. These past months with you they've changed everything for me. Changed how this house feels, how the work feels, how I see the future. And I know we said we'd go slow, but before I leave, I need you to know. I know, she interrupted softly. I know, Wyatt, and I feel it too. His exhale was shaky with relief. Then with infinite care, he cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her. It was gentle, reverent, a question and an answer all at once. Evelyn rose on her toes and kissed him back, pouring into it all the words she couldn't quite say yet. When they finally pulled apart, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. I'll be back before you know it, he murmured. And when I return, we need to have a serious conversation about the future. What kind of conversation? He smiled, brushing his thumb across her cheekbone. The kind that involves promises. The kind that makes this permanent. Before she could respond, he kissed her once more and stepped back, collecting his bags and heading toward the barn where his horse waited. Evelyn watched from the porch as he rode away, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until he disappeared entirely. The ranch felt impossibly empty without him. The first few days passed in a blur of work. Evelyn threw herself into tasks, reorganizing the supply shed, preparing preserves for winter, teaching the children with extra attention. Miguel and Carlos checked on her regularly, their presence a comfort even though they couldn't fill the Wyatt-shaped absence. On the fourth day, Kate came to visit, arriving in her wagon with a basket of food and a knowing look. You're surviving, she observed, accepting the coffee Evelyn poured. But you're not thriving. I miss him, Evelyn admitted. Is that foolish? We've only been, whatever we are, for such a short time. Love doesn't follow a schedule, Kate said simply. And yes, it's love. Don't bother denying it. I can see it written all over your face. Evelyn sank into her chair, cradling her coffee cup. It terrifies me. Of course it does. You've spent your whole life learning that love means loss. But Evelyn, sometimes love means finding. Kate's voice was gentle but firm. My brother is going to come back from Denver, and when he does, I suspect he's going to ask you something important. You need to decide now whether you're brave enough to say yes. What if I'm not? Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. And that's a different kind of loss, the preventable kind. After Kate left, Evelyn walked out to the rise where she'd sometimes seen Wyatt stand, looking over his land. The ranch spread below her, peaceful in the late afternoon light. Cattle dotted the pastures. Smoke curled from the bunkhouse where Miguel and Carlos were probably preparing their supper. The main house stood solid and welcoming, so different from the neglected bachelor dwelling she'd first encountered. She'd helped build this, not just cleaned it, but transformed it into something that could hold a future. And the man who owned this land had offered her a place in that future, not as a convenience or obligation, but as a partner he'd chosen. The question Kate had posed echoed in her mind. Was she brave enough to say yes? A week after Wyatt's departure, a fierce snowstorm rolled in, trapping everyone indoors for 2 days. Evelyn spent the time baking bread, mending clothes, and trying not to count the hours until his return. The children couldn't come for lessons, so she read by the fire and worked on the books and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. On the 8th day, she woke to brilliant sunshine and the sound of a rider approaching. Her heart leapt even before she confirmed it was Wyatt, returned earlier than expected, his face bright with cold and something that looked like triumph. She ran out without even grabbing her shawl, meeting him as he dismounted. "You're back," she said unnecessarily, drinking in the sight of him. "I'm back." He grinned, pulling an envelope from his coat. "And I got the loan. Carson's cattle will be here by spring. The ranch is going to grow, Evelyn, really grow." "That's wonderful," she said, meaning it. "It's more than wonderful. It's the beginning of something bigger." He tucked the envelope away and took both her hands in his. "But I didn't ride hard for 2 days straight just to tell you about cattle and loans." "No?" "No." His gray eyes were intense, serious. "I rode hard because I couldn't stand another day away from you. Because I spent every night in Denver lying awake and thinking about what I wanted my future to look like. And Evelyn, every version of that future had you in it." Her breath caught. This was it. The moment Kate had warned her about, the question she needed to be brave enough to answer. "Come with me," Wyatt said, leading her toward his horse. "I want to show you something." They rode together, Evelyn seated in front of him, his arms around her as he guided the horse up to the high-rise that overlooked the ranch. When they dismounted, he kept hold of her hand, standing with her at the edge of the world. "Look at it," he said quietly. "Really look." Evelyn did. The ranch spread before them like a promise, the house she'd brought back to life, the land Wyatt had worked to tame, the mountains standing eternal watch over it all. The sky was impossibly blue, and the air was so clear she felt like she could see forever. "My parents stood here when they first claimed this land," Wyatt said. "My father told my mother this was where they'd build their dream. They did it together, through drought and disease and every hardship the territory could throw at them. They made something that lasted." He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. "I want that, Evelyn. Not just the ranch, but the partnership. The building something together. The facing whatever comes side by side." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring, simple gold, worn smooth by time. "This was my mother's. And before you say anything, I'm not asking you to replace her, or fill her shoes, or be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm asking because you've already proven you're the partner I've been looking for." Evelyn stared at the ring, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "I came here expecting a practical arrangement with a man I'd never met," she whispered. "I lost that before I even arrived, but somehow I found this instead." "Found you. Is that a yes?" Wyatt's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "Still terrified that this will disappear, that I'll wake up and it will all be gone. Then I'll tell you every single day that it's real, that I'm not going anywhere, that you're stuck with me whether you like it or not." He smiled, tender and true. "But Evelyn, I need to hear you say it, yes or no." She looked at this man who'd offered her work when she needed purpose, patience when she needed time, and love when she'd finally learned to accept it. She thought about the house they'd built together, the children she taught, the life that had grown from ruins and become something beautiful. She thought about her mother's voice, telling her that education was the only thing no one could take from you. But her mother had been wrong. Love, when given freely and accepted bravely, couldn't be taken either. It could only be surrendered. And Evelyn Harper was done surrendering. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." Wyatt's whoop of joy echoed across the prairie as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around. When he set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "We'll do it right," he promised, pulling her close. "Small ceremony, just the people who matter. And then we'll build this ranch into something that lasts generations." "Together," Evelyn said. "Together," he agreed, and kissed her with a passion that spoke of promises kept and futures built and love that had grown honest and true. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Salvation Creek. Kate stood as witness, tears streaming down her face. Miguel, Carlos, and Maria attended with their children, Rosa clutching a bouquet of dried wildflowers she'd made herself. Even the station master who delivered such devastating news months ago came to wish them well. Evelyn wore a dress Kate had helped her sew from fabric Wyatt had brought back from Denver, simple blue wool that brought out her eyes. No veil, no elaborate trappings, just her hair braided with ribbon and her mother's locket around her neck. When the minister asked if she took this man, Evelyn looked into Wyatt's gray eyes and said, "I do," without hesitation or fear. When he slipped the ring back onto her finger, she'd removed it that morning so he could place it there officially, she felt something click into place, like a door long barred finally swinging open. The reception at Kate's boarding house was warm and boisterous, full of laughter and food and genuine happiness for the unlikely couple. But Evelyn found herself eager for it to end, eager to return to the ranch that was now truly her home. Winter settled over Brennan Ridge Ranch with fierce determination, sealing them in with snow and wind and bitter cold. But inside the house, warmth reigned. Wyatt had moved Evelyn's belongings into the main bedroom, his mother's old room where they'd first acknowledged their feelings during the storm. Together, they made it theirs, a space that belonged to their shared future rather than his family's past. The intimacy of marriage was new and sometimes awkward for Evelyn, who'd spent her whole life protecting herself from vulnerability. But Wyatt was patient and gentle, understanding that trust was built slowly, even in the marriage bed, and gradually she learned to let him in completely, to accept pleasure without guilt and affection without suspicion. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said one night as they lay tangled together, firelight painting shadows across the ceiling. "That I'm happy," Evelyn admitted, "and that it frightens me how much I have to lose now." "You're not going to lose it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I promise you, Evelyn, you're not going to lose this." "You can't promise that. Life doesn't work that way." "Then I promise I'll fight like hell to keep it, to keep us." His arms tightened around her. "That's a promise I can make." The winter days developed their own rhythm. Wyatt worked with Miguel and Carlos to keep the cattle fed and healthy through the brutal weather. Evelyn managed the house, taught the children when they could safely travel, and discovered she had a talent for the bookkeeping that kept the ranch financially sound. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Wyatt often reading newspapers he'd collected from town while Evelyn mended or planned lessons. Sometimes they talked for hours about their dreams for the ranch, for the school Evelyn wanted to build, for the family they might have. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people are genuinely at ease with each other. But the true test came in February, when Evelyn woke one morning feeling violently ill. At first she tried to hide it, not wanting to worry Wyatt or admit weakness. But after a week of morning sickness and overwhelming fatigue, Maria pulled her aside during a visit. "You are with child," Maria said simply, in a tone that brooked no argument. "I have had 4 babies. I know the signs." Evelyn's hand went to her still flat stomach. A baby. She and Wyatt had talked about children in abstract terms, something for the future, but this made it immediate, real, terrifying in its permanence. "I don't know how to tell him," she admitted. Maria's smile was knowing. Men always want to know these things. Even when they pretend to be surprised, they are hoping. That evening, after supper was cleared and they'd settled by the fire, Evelyn gathered her courage. "Wyatt," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from his newspaper, immediately attentive to the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think it is." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The newspaper slipped from his hands, forgotten. For a long moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, pure joy transforming his weathered features into something almost boyish. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Evelyn asked, needing to hear it. Instead of answering, Wyatt crossed to her and pulled her up into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made her throat tight. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he murmured against her hair. "Terrified, yes, but happy in a way I didn't know was possible." "I'm terrified too," she confessed. "What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not a good mother? What if—" "Then we'll figure it out together," he interrupted gently, "just like we've figured out everything else. You're not doing this alone, Evelyn. You're never going to be alone again." The pregnancy progressed through late winter and into spring. As Evelyn's belly grew, so did the ranch's fortunes. Carson's cattle arrived in April, healthy and strong, doubling their herd size. With careful management and the loan from Denver, Brennan Ridge Ranch was becoming a significant operation in the territory. But more importantly, it was becoming a real home. Wyatt built a cradle from oak, his hands careful and sure as he shaped wood into something meant to hold their child. Evelyn sewed tiny clothes with Maria's help, trying to imagine the little person who would wear them. Together they prepared the small room next to theirs as a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and hanging curtains Evelyn had made. The children she taught were fascinated by her growing belly, asking endless questions about babies and how they were made. Evelyn answered honestly but carefully, marveling at how far she'd come from the frightened woman who'd stepped off that train 9 months ago. Labor came on a cold November dawn, exactly 1 year after Evelyn had first said yes to Wyatt's proposal. The snow fell soft and silent as Maria took charge, with the calm efficiency of a woman who'd seen many births. Wyatt paced the kitchen, useless and terrified, while Miguel tried to distract him with talk of cattle and spring planting. The pain was worse than anything Evelyn had imagined, but she gritted her teeth and bore it, remembering Maria's words. "Women are strong. We have always been strong. You will be strong, too." When the baby finally arrived, a daughter, perfect and screaming with indignation at being born into a cold world, Evelyn wept with relief and joy and overwhelming love. Maria cleaned the baby and placed her in Evelyn's arms, and for the first time since her mother's death, Evelyn felt truly complete. Wyatt appeared in the doorway, his face pale with worry. "Evelyn? Come meet your daughter," she said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the tiny red face peeking from the blanket, his expression crumbled into wonder. "She's so small," he whispered. "She's perfect," Evelyn corrected. Wyatt sat carefully on the edge of the bed and held out his hands. With Maria's help, Evelyn transferred the baby to his arms. She watched as this strong man who'd built a ranch from nothing, who faced down storms and harsh land without flinching, trembled as he held his daughter. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa. And I promise you I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you never want for anything. Love, safety, opportunity, it's all yours." The baby yawned, unconcerned with his promises, and Evelyn felt her heart swell with a love so fierce it almost hurt. This was her family, her real family, built not from blood obligation but from choice and courage, and two people deciding to trust each other despite every reason not to. "What should we name her?" Wyatt asked, unable to tear his eyes away from his daughter. Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss and fear, the unexpected kindness, the slow building of trust that had become love. She thought about Wyatt's mother, who'd built this ranch alongside her husband and created a legacy of strength and partnership. "Sarah," she said softly, "after your mother, if that's all right with you." Wyatt looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's more than all right. It's perfect." As the snow fell outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, the three of them, husband, wife, and daughter, sat together in the room that had once belonged to another Sarah, another woman who'd built something lasting in this unforgiving land. Evelyn Harper. Brennan looked at her daughter and her husband and thought about the train platform where her old life had ended. She'd arrived too late for the future she'd imagined, the safe, practical arrangement with a stranger, but she'd been right on time for something infinitely better, for love that was earned rather than promised, for partnership built on respect and trust, for a home that wasn't just shelter, but sanctuary, for a family that was chosen and cherished and real. Outside, the wind sang through the prairie grass, carrying stories of all the people who'd come west seeking something better. Some had found fortune, some had found only hardship. But Evelyn had found exactly what she'd been searching for without even knowing it. She'd found herself. And in doing so, she'd found everything else that mattered. Sarah's first year passed in a blur of sleepless nights and infinite wonder. Evelyn discovered that motherhood was both harder and more rewarding than anything she'd ever imagined. The baby was demanding, colicky in those early months, requiring constant attention that left Evelyn exhausted and sometimes questioning her capabilities. But Wyatt surprised her. He'd wake in the night to walk Sarah when she cried, his deep voice rumbling soft lullabies his own mother had once sung to him. He'd change diapers without complaint and bounce the baby on his knee while Evelyn caught desperately needed sleep. They became partners in this too, just as they were partners in everything else. "You're good at this," Evelyn told him one evening, watching as he coaxed a smile from their daughter. "At what? Making faces until she laughs?" Wyatt grinned as Sarah giggled at him. "At being a father, at being present." She moved closer, running her hand through his hair. "My own father loved me, I think, but he was always working, always somewhere else. You're here. Where else would I be?" Wyatt looked genuinely confused by the question. "This is everything I wanted, right here." As Sarah grew, so did the ranch and Evelyn's ambitions. The teaching she'd been doing informally in the kitchen had expanded beyond what the space could accommodate. Nearly a dozen children now came 3 days a week, children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders, all hungry for education their parents couldn't provide. One spring evening, as Evelyn was putting away the slates and primers that cluttered every available surface, Wyatt came in from checking the new calves. "We need more space," she said without preamble. "The children are practically sitting on top of each other, and if word spreads any further, we'll have to turn families away." "I've been thinking about that," Wyatt said, washing his hands at the pump. "What if we built a proper schoolhouse?" Evelyn turned to stare at him. "A schoolhouse? Wyatt, that would cost—" "I know what it would cost, and we can afford it." He dried his hands and came to stand beside her. "The ranch is doing well, better than well. We expanded the herd again last month, the cattle prices are strong, and we've got enough saved that we can invest in something that matters." "A school matters to you?" She knew it mattered to her, but she'd never dared dream Wyatt would consider it a priority. "Education matters. Giving these kids a chance matters." He gestured to the scattered materials. "You've built something here, Evelyn. Something important. It deserves better than my kitchen table." Tears pricked her eyes. "Are you certain? It would be a significant undertaking." "I'm certain." He pulled her close, careful not to disturb Sarah, who dozed in her cradle nearby. "Besides, if we're going to have more children, and I hope we are, they'll need a school too. Malshakit. Might as well build it now." The school project began that summer. Wyatt and Miguel chose a site on a gentle rise a quarter-mile from the main house, visible from the porch, but far enough to give the students their own space. With help from neighboring ranchers whose children would attend, they built a sturdy one-room structure with large windows to let in light, a wood stove for winter warmth, and a small bell tower that could call students to lessons. Evelyn threw herself into outfitting the school with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. She wrote to educational supply companies in Denver and even as far as Chicago, ordering proper desks, slates, books, maps, and all the materials a real school required. Wyatt never questioned the expenses, trusting her judgment completely. The red door was her idea, a bright splash of color against the honey-colored wood, a beacon of welcome that could be seen from miles away. When Wyatt painted it, Sarah toddling around his feet trying to help, Evelyn stood back and felt something shift in her chest. This was legacy. This was permanence. This was proof that the broken woman who'd stepped off that train 2 years ago had built something that would outlast her. The school opened in September with 15 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Evelyn stood at the front of that room on the first day, her heart pounding with nervousness and pride, and saw the future looking back at her through eager young eyes. Rosa, now 10, and Evelyn's most advanced student, help translate for the younger Mexican children still learning English. Mateo had developed a talent for mathematics that delighted Evelyn. And there were others: Tom Bailey's daughter, Emma, who had a gift for storytelling, and the Peterson twins, who could barely sit still but absorbed information like sponges. Kate attended the opening ceremony, tears streaming down her face as she watched her sister-in-law ring the school bell for the first time. "Your mother would be so proud," she told Evelyn afterward. "You've created exactly what she dreamed of, a place where children can rise above their circumstances through learning." "I just wish she could have seen it," Evelyn said quietly. "She can," Kate said with conviction. "Somehow, I think she can." The seasons turned. Sarah grew from infant to toddler, her bright eyes taking in everything with intense curiosity. She'd inherited Wyatt's gray eyes and Evelyn's dark hair, along with a stubborn independence that both parents recognized in themselves. "She's going to be trouble," Wyatt said one evening, watching as their daughter refused to go to bed, insisting she needed to hear one more story. "She's going to be extraordinary," Evelyn corrected, though she was smiling. "Just like her father." "And her mother," Wyatt added. "Don't forget that part." In the third year of their marriage, opportunity knocked in an unexpected form. The ranch adjacent to Brennan Ridge, a struggling operation owned by an aging widower named Henderson, came up for sale. The land was good, well-watered, and fertile, with established pastures and sturdy outbuildings. "It would double our acreage," Wyatt said, studying the property map spread across their kitchen table. "Give us room to expand the herd significantly, maybe even branch into horse breeding like I've been thinking about." "Can we afford it?" Evelyn asked, though she'd already been running the numbers in her head. The school had been expensive, and they'd just invested in new breeding stock. "Not easily. We'd need to take another loan, and it would stretch us thin for a year, maybe two." He looked up at her. "But in the long run, it would secure our future, Sarah's future, make the ranch into something that could support multiple generations." Evelyn thought about risk and reward, about the careful calculations she'd learned making pennies stretch in Boston versus the bold moves required to build something lasting in the West. "Do it," she said. "Take the risk. We'll make it work." The look Wyatt gave her was equal parts admiration and love. "You're sure? It's going to mean tightening our belts, working harder than ever." "I'm sure." She covered his hand with hers. "We've built everything we have by taking chances when they mattered. That matters." The Henderson purchase went through in early spring. Suddenly, Brennan Ridge Ranch sprawled across nearly 600 acres, with a herd approaching 200 head of cattle and ambitious plans for the future. The workload increased dramatically, requiring them to hire 2 more ranch hands and pushing everyone to their limits. But Evelyn thrived on the challenge. She managed the expanded books with meticulous precision, found ways to trim expenses without sacrificing quality, and somehow still taught school 3 days a week while raising an increasingly energetic toddler. Some nights she collapsed into bed so exhausted she couldn't speak. But lying there in Wyatt's arms, listening to Sarah's soft breathing from the nearby nursery, she felt a contentment so profound it bordered on disbelief. "Are you happy?" Wyatt asked one such night, his voice barely above a whisper. "Deliriously," Evelyn answered. "Exhausted, sometimes overwhelmed, occasionally questioning my sanity, but happy in a way I never thought possible." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because I need you to know something. Every single day I thank whatever force brought you to that train platform. Even the tragedy of Morrison's death, terrible as it was, gave me you. And I can't regret that." "Neither can I," Evelyn admitted. "I came here expecting nothing and found everything." The 4th year brought both triumph and trial. The ranch flourished under their careful management, turning profit even after loan payments. The school gained a reputation that drew students from homesteads 20 miles away, with some families arranging for their children to board in town during the week just to attend. But success brought challenges. Some in Salvation Creek resented the ranch's expansion, muttering about outsiders taking more than their share. A few ranchers whose children attended the school complained that Evelyn was teaching ideas above the student stations, filling their heads with ambitions that would only lead to disappointment. The criticism stung, but Evelyn refused to let it dim her vision. "Let them complain," she told Wyatt when he mentioned the gossip he'd heard in town. These children deserve every opportunity we can give them. If that makes some people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not ours. Then, in late summer, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from a school board in Denver inquiring whether Mrs. Brennan would consider serving as a consultant for their territorial education initiative. They'd heard about her successful school and wanted her expertise in establishing similar programs in other rural communities. "They want to pay you," Wyatt said, reading over her shoulder. "A substantial amount, too. But you'd have to travel to Denver for meetings, maybe visit other communities to help set up their schools." Evelyn's first instinct was to refuse. How could she leave Sarah? Leave the ranch? Leave her own students? But as she read the letter again, she felt something stir. Ambition, maybe, or the recognition that her work could reach beyond this single school. "What do you think?" she asked Wyatt. "I think you should do it." His answer was immediate and firm. "This is important, Evelyn. What you've built here could help hundreds of children across the territory, and Sarah and I will be fine for a week or two at a time. But the school, Rosa's nearly 13 and reads better than most adults. She could help Kate substitute teach while you're gone. Or we close the school for a week. The children won't wither from a brief break." Evelyn looked at her husband, this man who'd supported every dream she'd dared to voice. "You're remarkable, do you know that?" "I'm practical," he corrected with a smile. "And I know better than to stand between you and something you're meant to do." She accepted the position, making 3 trips to Denver over the following year and visiting 6 different communities to help establish schools. Each trip was hard. Leaving Sarah grew no easier with repetition, but the work was deeply fulfilling. She saw her model replicated, watched other women light up with purpose as they took on teaching roles, helped communities understand that education wasn't a luxury, but an investment in their future. Between trips, life at Brennan Ridge continued its forward march. Sarah, now 4 years old, was bright and fearless, spending her days helping Miguel feed the chickens or following Carlos around asking endless questions. She'd inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's steady temperament, along with a streak of mischief that kept both parents on their toes. "She needs siblings," Kate observed one afternoon, watching Sarah order around the ranch dogs like a tiny general. "Only children get too used to being the center of attention." "We've been trying," Evelyn admitted quietly. "It just hasn't happened yet." Kate squeezed her hand. "Give it time. These things come when they're meant to." As if summoned by the conversation, Evelyn discovered 2 months later that she was pregnant again. The news brought joy, tempered with anxiety. She was older now, nearly 28, and the memory of Sarah's difficult birth remained vivid. But Wyatt was overjoyed, and even Sarah seemed to understand she'd soon have competition for her parents' attention. "Baby?" she asked, patting Evelyn's still flat stomach. "My baby?" "Our baby," Evelyn corrected gently. "You'll be a big sister. That's a very important job." This pregnancy proved easier than the first. Evelyn continued teaching through the winter, though she tired more easily and had to delegate some of the physical work to Kate and Rosa. Wyatt hovered protectively until Evelyn finally told him that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and he needed to stop treating her like she might shatter. The baby, a son they named James after Wyatt's father, arrived in early spring. The birth was swift and relatively uncomplicated, leaving Evelyn exhausted but triumphant. Sarah approached her new brother with a mixture of fascination and suspicion, eventually deciding he was acceptable as long as he didn't touch her toys. "Now we have a match set," Wyatt said, holding his son with the same awe he'd shown with Sarah. "Our family is complete." But life had one more surprise in store. 6 months after James's birth, Henderson's nephew contacted them with an unusual proposition. He'd inherited additional land from his uncle, a parcel that bordered the eastern edge of their expanded ranch, but had no interest in ranching himself. Would the Brennans consider purchasing it at a favorable price to consolidate the holdings? "It's more than we need," Evelyn said, studying the survey maps. "But it would give us control of the entire watershed, security for future generations." "Can we swing it financially?" Wyatt asked. Evelyn did the calculations, factoring in cattle prices, expected calving rates, loan payments, and her consulting income. "Barely. We'd have to be very careful for the next 2 years. But yes, We can do it. They made the purchase, and Brennan Ridge Ranch became one of the most substantial operations in the territory. With the expanded land came expanded responsibility, but also expanded opportunity. They could weather bad years, experiment with new breeding programs, offer employment to more families. The school continued to grow. By its fifth year, attendance had swelled to 23 students, requiring Evelyn to hire an assistant teacher. She chose Emma Bailey, now 18 and newly graduated from a teaching college in Denver, who brought fresh energy and new ideas to the classroom. "You've built something that will outlast all of us," Emma told Evelyn one afternoon as they watched the students during recess. "There are children here who will go on to college, become teachers themselves, doctors, lawyers. And it all started because you refused to accept that frontier children deserved less than city children." Evelyn watched Sarah playing with the other children, her daughter's laughter bright and fearless. "I just wanted to give them what my mother gave me, the belief that they could be more than their circumstances. You've given them that, and so much more." The years continued their steady march. Sarah grew tall and strong, developing her mother's love of learning and her father's affinity for the land. She could ride before she could read fluently, could help with the cattle as competently as any ranch hand, but also devoured books and showed a gift for mathematics that delighted Evelyn. James was quieter, more contemplative, with an artist's soul that expressed itself in careful drawings of the ranch and everything in it. He followed Miguel everywhere, learning Spanish before English came naturally, and showed an intuitive understanding of animals that made him invaluable around the ranch despite his young age. Evelyn sometimes caught herself just watching them, her children, her students, the life she'd built, and marveling at the distance she'd traveled from that dusty train platform. The frightened woman who'd arrived expecting nothing had somehow created everything. On the 7th anniversary of her arrival in Salvation Creek, Wyatt suggested they ride up to the overlook where he'd proposed. It was a warm autumn evening, the kind where the air felt thick with endings and beginnings. They left the children with Kate and rode together across land that had become as familiar as breathing. At the top of the rise, they dismounted and stood looking over the ranch spread below. The main house glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from its chimney. The barn and outbuildings stood solid and well-maintained. Cattle dotted the pastures, the herd larger and healthier than ever. And there, distinct against the golden grass, stood the schoolhouse with its red door, windows bright with the promise of tomorrow. "Look at what we built," Wyatt said softly, his arm around her waist. "Look at what you built, Evelyn." "What we built," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You would have found a way. You're the strongest person I know." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "Do you remember what I told you that first day at the platform, when I offered to help you? You said the town wasn't kind to women alone, that you understood what my situation meant. I understood that you needed a chance. What I didn't understand was that you'd take that chance and transform it into something extraordinary. That you'd take my half-broken ranch and failing household and turn it into a home. That you'd take my loneliness and make it partnership." His voice roughened with emotion. "I thought I was helping you, but Evelyn, you saved me." "We saved each other," she said, tears blurring her vision. "I came here broken and afraid, expecting nothing. You gave me work, then respect, then love. You gave me time to heal and space to grow. You believed in my dreams when I barely dared to voice them. You were worth believing in." Wyatt cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, especially the hard days because we faced them together." Below them, the ranch sprawled in the fading light, a testament to courage and partnership, and the kind of love that was built brick by brick, day by day, through shared work and shared dreams. Evelyn thought about the letter she'd received that morning, an invitation to speak at a territorial education conference in Denver, recognition of the model she'd created at Brennan Ridge. She thought about Sarah, already talking about going to college someday, and James, who'd recently announced he wanted to be a veterinarian. She thought about the students who'd passed through her school and gone on to build better lives, carrying forward the belief that they deserved more than poverty and ignorance. She thought about the frightened woman on the train platform, clutching a suitcase and a dead man's promise, certain that her life was over. And she realized that woman had been right, in a way. That life, the life of fear and survival and making do with scraps, had ended that day. But a new life had begun. One she'd built with her own hands and heart, alongside a partner who'd chosen her not from desperation but from recognition. One that was messy and challenging and sometimes exhausting, but real in hers and more precious than gold. "I love you," she told Wyatt, the words feeling insufficient for the depth of what she felt. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "I love you too," he replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty rancher with more dreams than sense." They stood there as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and purple. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and earth and home. In the distance, they could hear Sarah's laughter and the lowing of cattle and all the sounds of a life well lived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. The ranch required constant work. The school demanded her attention. The children needed guidance. There would be hard winters and difficult seasons, setbacks and struggles. But they would face it all together, just as they'd faced everything else. As darkness settled over Brennan Ridge Ranch, Wyatt and Evelyn rode back down the hill toward the lights of home. Sarah and James would be waiting, probably already in their nightclothes and begging Kate for one more story. The fire would need tending, the doors would need locking, tomorrow's bread would need setting to rise. The ordinary, extraordinary work of a life chosen and cherished and earned. Evelyn Harper had arrived in Colorado Territory 7 years ago, 3,000 miles from home, to marry a stranger who died before she could meet him. She'd had nothing, no money, no prospects, no reason to hope, but she'd had courage, even if she hadn't recognized it at the time. The courage to accept help from a stranger. The courage to work hard and rebuild. The courage to open her heart to love after loss. The courage to dream bigger than survival. And that courage had carried her here, to this life that exceeded anything she'd dared imagine. Some stories end with happily ever after, as if happiness were a destination reached and held forever. But Evelyn understood now that happiness wasn't a place you arrived at. It was something you built day by day, with calloused hands and stubborn hope, and the willingness to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. As she and Wyatt walked into their home, greeted by the chaos of children and love and life, Evelyn smiled at the beautiful, messy reality of it all. She'd been too late for the man who'd sent for her, but she'd arrived exactly on time for everything that mattered. And in the end, that made all the difference.